Welcome back to the Cameo Show. Today we have with us Krystel Beall. Krystel is a wife, she's a mom, she's a friend to many, an overall great human being with a huge heart. She started her career in the health and fitness world with a focus on corporate wellness and still continues to do group exercise classes. Just a genuine love for that type of activity and helping people. Krystel is heavily involved in the community as a community outreach and philanthropy coordinator for Bealls Inc. and the Scholarship Foundation throughout that corporation. And she is also a board member for nonprofit organizations like Resilient Retreat and No Blues News. Resilient Retreat being one that is an organization that empowers people who have suffered from trauma, recover from their past conditioning, and learn to live free. They offer free programming, which Krystel is partaking in as a trauma and abuse survivor herself, which that is exactly where we're going to start talking about. Krystel, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Over the last few years, particularly with COVID, is a starting point for many people that I've been interviewing recently. It prompted a lot of change in people's lives, and you had things that were changing in your world that were unrelated to COVID, but all of those things kind of happened at once. And so as a way of handling all of that change, you started learning new ways to process that. And some of those changes that I will mention that you can take from there are COVID and the impact it had on your husband's business as a retail storefront corporation, but then also you were pregnant and you were having a new baby for the first time in several years with older children at that time in your life. So at that stage, there was a lot of change being thrown at you. And do you remember how you felt in that moment?
Interestingly enough, I was okay. I feel very blessed and fortunate to have a great support system around us. And I've always found myself to be sort of like empathic, go with the flow, like whatever's supposed to happen is going to happen. We'll figure this out. I don't watch the news. So I think that was a big kicker of me being okay through it all.
Yeah.
But, seeing my husband on the lanai on conference calls in the business, that part of it really rocked our world. He became CEO like 3 months before that happened. I were just taking my daughter on a trip for her 10th birthday to New York City, and we had like the best time. And I remember coming back, it was late January, and she was like, "Mom, why are people wearing masks in the airport?" Like, I don't know.
We didn't know yet.
And it kind of started creeping in. And then like I had a baby shower in the middle of February, and like bam, the world shut down.
Yeah.
That part of it was scary because I was like, am I going to be able to have my child in a hospital? Is my husband going to be able to be there with me? The kids are home from school. It was a lot. I think for me, we have 3 older children, and at the time they were 10, 11, and 13, and they were home, and I liked the peacefulness of us being able to be in our network. They were either at our house or they were there at a parent's house. I do remember the days of wiping my groceries down with Clorox wipes and all the things we did. But sitting in the stillness of all of that, I appreciated the stillness, to be honest. Like you mentioned, I'm very involved in the community. It was community events, and we're here, we're there, we're everywhere. I was 8 months pregnant. And I just got to lounge around and walk the yard and just really get some intentional time that I wouldn't have gotten with myself or my family otherwise, like if that hadn't happened. So to be honest, I think it was, looking back, a blessing in disguise, being sensitive to all those who did suffer loss and grief towards that time. But, for me personally, it was a reset. It was a big reset. My husband and I got to reflect a lot on lifestyle changes. Obviously, we're having a baby, so life is changing anyway, but, everywhere shut down. Prior to that, we were traveling and, going to New York every other month, and LA sometimes, and Vegas sometimes. And, we were all over the place. And along with the travel comes all the fun festivities that you engage in and involve yourselves in. And I knew that had to change. For me, especially, because I wouldn't be able to tag along like I used to, but I was almost relieved that happened that way.
And so it gave you a chance to slow down and reconnect in ways that you maybe hadn't had to before, because there were things that you were doing together, but this was a way of just being together. And I'm wondering if, as all of that happened and all of that change was taking place and you were spending more time with yourself and with your group, your core group, your nuclear family there, if that was a time when you felt like, gosh, I'm getting to know myself in ways that I never had before, and maybe inspired a curiosity to learn more about yourself, and maybe things came up that you weren't even anticipating, and was that kind of the start, the kickoff of this deeper desire for knowledge and understanding yourself in this recovery process?
100%. A lot of that had to do with, when I did pop on the news and I would see how everything was just fear-based, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't like that. I feel like it's bullying, to be honest, and I don't do well with that at all. So I was concerned about our children's mental health, my own mental health. Like, I don't like the fact that I don't like being forced into anything. I don't like,
Yeah.
I just am very free-willed, free-spirited, I'll say. Um, so during that time, I would think it was more like, Brody was born the end of April. It was a beautiful experience. Matt got to be there. It actually worked out pretty well. No one could visit us at the hospital. We did have some friends smuggling some Smoothie King for us because the food stopped at the time. I don't know why they stopped feeding us during that time, but that's okay. um, and we just got to be there together, and it was really beautiful without visitors and all the things, and still got great treatment and everything. And it was a great experience, but I think it was more the time after that, having the new baby, being in it, the world starting to open back up, my husband starting to get back into life. And here I am, new mommy. I have this hardcore group of friends, my tribe thread, you know who you are. I found that connection was a
Mm-hmm.
big thing for me because, we couldn't go certain places together, but like having that network of connection, I started talking to my talk therapist, life coach, Kathy, who's amazing. And we've been talking to her on and off for about 10 years now, and more so, about 6, 7 years ago, right before we got married. And kind of on and off. But then I was like, I think I need to dive deeper into this because I'm starting to recognize things. Things were surfacing within me, and some of those things were like severe anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
The really almost like anger towards the way people were being treated and forced into, so she would say, okay, well, think about your childhood. Where in childhood did you feel fear? Where did you feel, and it was all about going back and healing my inner child.
Mm-hmm.
I had a very interesting childhood. My parents were young when they had me. Raised, my grandparents were very young when they had my parents.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Same.
was raised by my grandparents, and my father died in a car accident when I was 2. And my mom, she didn't deal too well with that, and kind
Mm-hmm.
of, lived her own life, a little bit of chaos. And I look back and think her now, we have a great relationship now, but I think her now for that because I'm like, you knew what was best for me, and that was Nan and Pops,
Yeah.
so I, instead of having some sort of abandonment spin on it, like I had for several years, I started to admire it more.
Yeah.
And like, what, I get it. Like, it wasn't my shit to deal with. It was
Yeah.
yours, and you allowed it, that separation. So digging deep with the childhood stuff was interesting, and learning my reactivity in some ways that I had even, been triggered by our family during COVID period of time.
Sure.
Like, everyone being home, like pick up your mess, and like, messes around the house would give me like, I know everyone, not many people like messy houses. I don't really allow ours to get messy,
Sure.
but I just felt I don't know how to say it. It
Out
was
of control, unsettled. I know I feel
out
that
of
way.
control. Like, I
Yeah.
started feeling like just, it was cabin fever. It was claustrophobic. I had been in this house. I'm a new baby. The hormones raging, surging. Like, I want to
Mm-hmm.
go out. I want to do this. And so I tried to get back into normal life as much as possible, and back into normal life as much as possible. As I realized, it's like going out and having cocktails, or going to brunch, and going to do this and going to do that. And like, but I have this new baby at the same time, and I'm nursing, and like, does this really fit the lifestyle I want? And then digging deeper into childhood stuff, it's like there's a lot of substance abuse triggers in my
Yeah.
childhood.
So I think when you start to dig deep, you start to recognize that there are these patterns, behavioral patterns and reactions that you've developed as a coping mechanism
Right.
or as a way of like distracting yourself that we carry into adulthood and we don't know any other way. They're just normal. They're just who we are. They're what we've
Right.
always done. And then when you are almost, I don't want to say forced, like you have to, but like when you're in a situation like you were, where everything's kind of changing, you aren't able to do the things that you maybe would have freely done before because of circumstances during that time, you start to recognize those patterns and go, well, hang on a second. I'm not okay with that anymore. And I need to understand why. And I need to understand that, like, if I want to get back into normal life, why am I in such a hurry for? At
Right.
least that in my experience was, as we started going through some self-discovery and self-awareness of some of our behavioral patterns and triggers, it was like, well, why am I trying to hurry past this? Why am I not just living in this present moment and enjoying it? And then understanding, like, if I'm feeling upset, why, so that I can process it instead of just distract myself away from it. And it sounds like that's a similar experience, that during that time you started recognizing, like, that's what I would have done before, but it doesn't really fit where I am now. So what else can I learn about myself, and what else can I learn to help me start to make different changes in my habits or in my thought process, in my reactivity? Is that what started, obviously, and I personally know from our conversation before that you read a lot of books and that you've been doing a lot of research, but how did you start getting involved more with your talk therapist and with some of the therapies that you've worked through? Because I think that therapy sometimes feels like a dirty word for people. It feels
Yeah.
like, I don't want to do that. That means there's something wrong with me. But I
Right.
just also think, from the other side of things, it's such a beautiful thing and such an interesting thing to talk about and be open about, because there's so much to learn. So I'm curious how you kind of started getting deeper into that piece of it as you were uncovering those things about yourself. And if you had any, like, trepidation about doing so, if you were like, I don't know if I really want to go there, and what that felt like.
Well, I wanted to go there. I'm like all in when I get,
Yeah.
once I realize I'm a fixer. Okay. So once I realize there's something that's not right, or, what I realized is, my husband did not have the capacity to support all of the things within me. Like, he was trying to get a business back open and up and running, and, all of that. And so I reached out for help. Like, I've always been one of those, I'm just going to do it myself and I'll be fine. And no, I like, what, screw that. You need help. You need help with your baby. You need help with your mind, body, and spirit. And I thrive off that connection. I'm a super high responder personality. I need communication, open connections. So I reached out to my girlfriend, Gigi, and I started the GFIT program. So fitness has been a huge part of my life as long as I can remember. And I know just from a, very young age, moving my body and, and fitness has just been such a pivotal part in my just life, sanity, motivation, coping, everything. So I reached out to her. I started her 4-month program. It was counting all my macros. It was doing 10,000 steps a day, 3 workouts a week. I just needed to focus on something productive for myself. I needed structure. And that's, I think, the biggest thing for me, because as much as a free spirit person I am, I also really thrive off discipline and structure at the same time.
Sure.
So that was really amazing for me. And my girlfriend Lauren started this YPO group, a spouse forum. My husband was in a forum, and it was essentially like his was more business and ours was a spouse forum. So you essentially go over, in the past 30 days, what has depleted your energy, which increased your energy. It's essentially an accountability group.
Yeah.
When you look back, you look forward, you talk about the now. So that all kind of, it's funny how the world works in mysterious ways when you need it the most. Like, all of those things kind of came together at once for me when I really, really needed it. And I would say that was probably January of 2021.
And do you feel like they all came together for you at the same time when you needed it because you were open to it? Or do you feel,
100%. Like, I had to be open to it, and mentally, spiritually, I was seeking it. So I was doing some research, talking to my talk therapist, and I needed it. And because my husband was in the group, I loved that he was, had that accountability for himself. And I think because at the time I wasn't working and I was a new mom, and I just I felt lost. I wasn't in the fitness world anymore. I wasn't where do I fit in all of this? So I just honed in on me, and honestly, realizing during that time period, I hadn't honed in on me ever before like that. Like, I had always reached out. Oh, I can help you. I can help you. I can fix this for you. I had never done that for myself. And I felt guilty. It's
Yeah.
amazing the amount of shame spirals that happen when your baby's 6 months old and you have someone watching him. So you could go do a self-help workshop, or you can go walk the bridge, or you could, why do we as women feel guilty for that?
Right. I think that's so common. And so I hate to use the word unfortunate, but I just feel like every new mom and dad in their own respect feels this sense of like, well, where do I fit into this? And I
Right.
feel guilty for trying to figure that out. I think really specifically as moms and women, we are always, how can I help you? What can I do here? Taking care of everyone in efficiency mode, in nurturing mode. And that until we practice giving to ourselves in that same way, it is uncomfortable. And
It
so
is
it's so uncomfortable.
terribly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And then like trying to describe it to people, and they're like, well, what's wrong with you? And I'm
Right.
like, apparently a lot. I don't know. Like I'm still trying to figure that out.
I'm trying to figure that out.
And I've always been a very open, tell like this hardly any filter kind of person. And so I found myself during those time periods when I was discovering more like emo dumping on people, like, like this happened, this happened, this happened. And it's like, okay, well, they don't need to absorb my stuff. So this means you need to take some extra steps to do a little bit more. So I really started researching trauma. And I think the big thing for me was the inward stuff. Like I read a couple books, Young Pueblo, Clarity and Connections, and
Mm-hmm.
Inward. I don't know if you've read those.
Mm-hmm. They're on these shelves somewhere.
Yeah, I love them. And that was like, they're quick reads, they're easy. And I love it because each page is like just a daily, almost like affirmation page for something for you to think about. So it wasn't, at the time, I hadn't reached the point where I could have the stillness to just sit down and relax and read a book. Again, I felt guilty.
Right.
And what I later realized is that underlying turbulence and anxiety actually ended up being complex PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
So to back it up a little bit, after long talks with a talk therapist and, kind of describing a lot was going on in my life and my patterns, and realizing a lot of like my thought processes and some fear I had and anxiety. And I just kind of went through this cycle in my head quite a bit of wanting to be safe and wanting to fix this, and safety and fixing and safety and fixing. And, when I was younger, I always thought it was ADHD, and I was prescribed Adderall, and I took that and contributed to a pretty gnarly eating disorder and eating patterns that we could get into on another segment, but that's a whole day I could spend on that. But we went to Amen clinics, did brain scans. My husband and I did it together. They do a full evaluation a couple times leading up to, and you have kind of your mentor person, and you talk, a little family history, a little medical history. You do some blood work that goes with it. You go in, you do your scans. We went to Atlanta. There's one in Miami as well. Invested in ourselves just to get some answers, and Matt got some really great answers for himself and some things that he uncovered. And I was blown away. So they sit down and they do your scans, and we're all in scan conversation together. It was via Zoom because, still there.
Yeah.
And it was Kathy, talk therapist, my husband and I, and we're looking, and it shows you like your surface scan, and then it shows your emotional brain scan. It was really interesting because on my surface scan, I had like right down the middle of my brain, like right on my cerebral cortex, there was like a divot almost. And I was like, that's interesting. And they're like, have you ever had a near drowning experience? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I've had a crazy childhood. Who knows what happened to me? I don't know if it was bathtub, kid, who knows?
Sure.
But then when we got into the emotional brain scan, I had the diamond pattern PTSD, meaning my frontal lobe, my parietal lobe, my temporal lobe, and my occipital, or actually my limbic system, all were firing off, which means that I had been traumatized in some sort of way, which is either physical or emotional response to distress over a long period of time, which is where the complex comes in, because, we can have traumatic events, but it's how we process those traumatic events, which was really interesting on the brain scan as well, because in the back, in the cerebellum, she's like, well, do you do any sort of dance or choreography? And I'm like, all my life, as long as I remember, I've been dancing, I've been flipping, I've been tumbling, I've been teaching classes, and a lot of coordination type exercises and working out. She's like, well, it's ironic because and I even said, I'm like, almost like I didn't deserve to have a complex PTSD. And
Yeah.
that's not the appropriate term for it. But I just was like, I never went to war. Like my childhood wasn't that bad. I felt really loved.
Right. There's so much comparison of like, well, somebody else's trauma is so much more extreme than mine. I can't possibly have that diagnosis. I mean, I'm not extreme enough for that. And it's like unfair that we do that to ourselves because
Right.
it's the comparison piece that needs to go out the door, but also we're robbing ourselves of the nurture and the care and the attention that we need to really heal ourselves from the core by
Right.
saying, well, I'm not traumatic enough. Like my experiences weren't enough for me to be that. It's
Right.
like, whoa. So you learn that and then you're like, okay, now I'm going to accept that. I'm going to allow that to be what it is now that I feel like I have the right to.
Right.
I hate to say it like that, but in your situation, it sounds like that may be the case, where you kind of like, okay, well, somebody else is telling me that it's legit. Now I can accept that.
Right. Well, and with that acceptance, I mean, I owned it. Not that so there's ownership and there's identification. I didn't identify as someone with PTSD because I feel like when you claim something as like your identity, it's almost like you kind of get into like a victim type mentality with it. And I refuse to do that. I'm like, I'm owning it. Like
Yes.
this is apparently part of what's going on with me. But it made so much sense. Like I mean, I'm one of those people when I find out about something, I dive super deep into it.
Mm-hmm.
So I started really researching trauma and the different types of trauma. And my talk therapist is amazing because she's worked a lot with people with trauma, and she's actually worked a lot with my mother.
Oh.
Prior to her working with me. So she knew all of my childhood trauma. She knew my mom. She probably knows more about my mom's stuff than I do. And that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that saved me 25 years of therapy right there. Just her understanding what she was dealing with before she started working with me. So she was prepared. And I think that was the biggest thing for me. And that's something that I would just have like the utmost gratitude for forever, is just finding the right person, because you can have many therapists, you can have many different resources out there, but you have to find what works for you. And I was really lucky enough to already have someone in line that worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
I refuse to be medicated. I'm not going to do any medication route. My entire life, I always knew I had anxiety, refused to take anything for it. I've never really felt like I floated more on the depressive side because I think I always kind of contradicted anything with the exercise, where the exercise came in for me. And so I would always kind of like move my body and know that I would never allow me to get in kind of a dark
Too
place.
Deep. Yeah.
Yeah, the deep place. But the pattern of I need to fix this or I need to leave. I need to fix this or I need to leave. Like I'm not safe or I am. Am I safe? Am I am? Can I trust them? Can I not? Like that was my pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And it showed up in a lot of my relationships, with my kids, with my husband, with my family, the people that I worked with. And so researching more of the trauma made me understand that we all have it. Like understanding what traumatic, what trauma responses are, whether it's fight, flight, freeze, fawn. I mean, we all do those things. Like how often that we're in traffic and someone cuts us off and it's like,
yeah,
just need to switch lanes. Like, why is that a big deal? Like, why
that didn't have anything to do with me. Right.
Right. And I'm not really a big traffic person, but I had to, actually like, oh, I'm the one that lets everyone in because I want the same respect. Like just let me in if I need to get in.
Right.
But what I realized is I was a freeze, flight, fawner. That was there's definitely a time period where I was a fighter. I was a little feisty, especially back in my drinking days.
Yeah, same. Wait, can we break those down a little bit? So can you talk about each one of those individually? So starting with like freeze.
Yeah. For example, freeze. So when you have a freeze response, I'll use my daughter for an example. If she feels like, part of her family is a loud Italian family, right? They love them and they're lovey, they're touchy, they're great. I seem to be a little bit more low key, even keeled. I find her to be more of an empath and she internalizes a lot and she's very sensitive to energy. So if she, walks into a room or somewhere and people are loud, or if she's in school and the teacher raises their voice and stuff, she'll have a tendency to just she freezes
Mm-hmm.
and almost like she gets overwhelmed. And even for myself, any conflict, like other people, like any other people in conflict or debated political conversations, which I completely stay away from, like I would freeze like my entire life, still do, like because I don't think there's any winning. I don't think there's anything positive that comes out of those types of debates.
And it's just a really uncomfortable feeling, right? I can relate in
right,
experiencing that feeling of being overwhelmed and just feeling like I feel like not unsafe, like something's threatening me, but just unsafe and even just participating in this. So I'm
right,
going to withdraw. I'm going to
right.
freeze and I'm just going to stand here.
Exactly. Freeze, withdraw, play small, whatever it is to protect yourself. I mean, they're all protection mechanisms, right?
Right.
Flight, I got to get out of here. I have to leave them. This isn't going to work, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a friendship, whether it's an environment, like you walk into a room, the energy is crazy and it's like, nope, I got to go. Sometimes it's discernment for sure.
Sure.
But there can be situations, I'll use myself for an example. Every marriage has its ups and downs and all arounds. And, we all have our different patterns. And before I can completely accept my husband's journey for what it was, and he could accept my journey for what it was, there were times when I'm like, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work because he's doing this and I'm doing this. And he needs to, like, I wanted him to jump on my bandwagon.
Yep.
And he wanted me to jump on him. You know what I mean? And we all go through that and it's
Right.
totally normal. But like, until we, again, find that acceptance for it all. But that was a big pattern of mine though.
Yeah.
That I realized that I had for many years. And a lot of time, and that's very much stemmed from childhood stuff for me, because I was put in very many situations that where I couldn't leave. And so like, by the time I got my car, I was out, like
I think it's even further than feeling unsafe or feeling conflict and being like, I got to get out of here. I feel like sometimes people use a flight response as a way of like protecting themselves because they feel like they're being too vulnerable or getting too close. And so I feel like it works both ways, in a way of like protecting yourself from being exposed, but then also in a way of protecting yourself from being unsure of what you're supposed to do with regard to your next steps. It's just like, you know what, let me get the hell out of here. And then I don't have to deal with it.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. But then again, that can become an avoidance behavior too.
100%.
And that's you don't want. And so that's what I was realizing about myself. Like I was avoiding some crucial conversations because of my flight response, or if I did try to have crucial conversations, they didn't work out the way that I thought. And this is where all the talk therapy came in, because I had a safe place. I could vent, I could have my crucial conversations. I could, things I couldn't really talk to my husband about in the moment because he has a big life too, or things that I just need to process. And again, we had three kids approaching teenage years, and now they are all teenagers, and now we have a toddler, and I still talk to her. I mean, we have our weekly call, and if we don't make it, then we don't make it and we reschedule, but that's fine. But that for me has been the biggest help as far as understanding why. Like why and getting to the bottom of, okay, and we still do it, go back to childhood. Like if you're super triggered by so-and-so's conversation, didn't have anything to do with you, why is that? And then fawning. So fawning is one that I didn't realize I did that much, but I did it a lot. People pleasing, essentially. It's keeping the peace. It's okay, well, I understand this person's reactivity pattern, so I'm going to play small or withdraw or skirt around or withhold the whole truth.
I literally just edited an episode that Greg and I did a couple of weeks ago on setting boundaries. And that was a huge part of what I experienced myself, kind of like the third step in the setting boundaries process. First, establishing what they are, then knowing how to communicate them efficiently and effectively. But like this third step of like, well, what do I do when they're broken? What do I do when someone repeatedly breaks them and I feel taken advantage of, or I feel disappointed, or I feel like I'm going to bend my own boundaries so that I don't disappoint someone else, that people pleasing aspect. And I just feel like it's like an inherent feeling that we all have. We have certain desires and needs, but then also as a human, you don't want to like upset someone. So you go into fawn response.
Right. And I realized I was fawning a lot because I was protecting myself. Like I didn't want to witness someone else's suffering because it hurt my heart and I didn't know how to fix it.
Especially if you feel like you're the one that's causing it. Even if it didn't, even if it
Especially,
was not the case and it didn't have anything to do with
right.
you, it was you like withholding a boundary that potentially hurt someone else.
Right. Or even learning how to set boundaries. Like I
Yeah.
didn't really understand how to set healthy boundaries.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't necessarily modeled a ton of healthy boundaries when I was younger. Like, we kind of pick things up. I'm good at in some ways, but then again, it's like too harsh, like I could set a boundary, but you better listen to it. And you better, it was too strict. It was too,
I'm that way. Yeah.
yeah, rigid.
Yeah.
So learning how to set healthy boundaries and sticking to them and just being like, you know what, if you can't respect my boundaries, then we'll circle back. Like, this isn't worth it for me. Like we're just not, I'm not going to do that. So taking myself out of the cycles and the patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a full-time job.
It's a constant. It doesn't ever go away. It's a constant evolution. Once you feel like, kind of like with kids, like once you feel like I got this phase down, then everything changes and you're like, oh, well, I might have nailed that for a minute, but now I'm on to something new that I've got a new challenge or something new that's come at me that I've got to learn how to deal with. And it's a constant evolution of like human emotion with regard to that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, those essentially are the trauma responses in a nutshell.
Yeah.
From my perspective, and understanding them really helped me navigate and understand and have a completely different lens for everyone in my life.
Yeah.
Because,
compassion.
Wow.
Yep.
Yes. And I've always found myself to be a compassionate person, but I'm looking back now, I'm like, that a time period there where I wasn't all in.
Yeah.
Like I am now. And it just is really opened my eyes to, we all have some sort of trauma. It doesn't necessarily have to be, what we think of like, car accidents or war, or I mean, it could be the way your parents criticized your grades, or the way clothes that you wore, or the emotional neglect. Like maybe you had everything you could ever imagine on the outside, the beautiful home, the trips, the everything, but you didn't have the nighttime snuggles.
Right.
You have that intentional time with your parents if they were busy. And I think that that's something that was a huge realization that, when we do get back into life here, which I feel like now we're back full-fledged into life, I'm going to do it differently.
Yeah.
You
have
know,
new tools.
I have
to see
tools in my toolbox. Like I was so busy before thinking I need to be successful. And it's like,
by society's definition of success.
yeah. And what is that? Like being busy and having the internet babysit my children. And I don't want to live like that. And I want them to have, all a balance with all the things, the slow intentional moments, the trips, but the time with their friends and the time on the gaming, and showing them how to set boundaries for themselves on that, because I've refused to be the helicopter mom. I don't have time to look at my kids' stuff. I don't have, that's just my personal parenting style. But
that's why I think it's so important to have these conversations. I feel like people are afraid to say, this is what's happening. This is how I feel. This is how I'm reacting to these things, because we all want it. Well, not we all, that's a horrible blanket statement, but like in a lot of cases, there's this pressure to feel like you have it all together, to present this best version of you. And it's not a conversation you can have with just anyone, but it is so important to find, like you said, your community. You can learn so much from other people who have been going through the same thing. And if we're brave enough to share it, you discover that that's exactly what you just said. Everybody's going through something, and we can all relate to each other if we're vulnerable enough to share and we find the right people. And like your talk therapist, and for me and for Greg, when we've gone to therapy, it's so important because you have this unbiased person, this person who doesn't make you feel like you have to be defensive because they're not really involved in it emotionally. And so I'm a huge advocate of therapy and removing the stigma around something having to be wrong with you or that you're broken. We all have broken pieces that we can use a little help navigating. And I love that that's been an important part of your journey too. I love that you reached out to Gigi, just to kind of circle back to that, and to finding a community during that time when you weren't really sure, but you knew something was off. What did you learn about yourself? What was that psychological process like?
What it taught me the most is I could have a completely healthy physique, six-pack if I wanted to, without high intensity exercise, just eating the right foods at the right times and the right portions. But I feel like from emotional healing, and physical wellness, mental wellness, all of that tied in, spirituality, all of that tied in. That's like the overall wellness. And I've gotten more into that recently. And that's kind of what this road has led to is, okay, I'm calmer now. I'm doing less high intensity, but I'm doing more internal work. And it's with the internal work that I'm feeling better. I'm seeing it from the inside out. I still have my battles with it, I think about a year and a half ago, I after Gigi's program, after the summer, I did the hormone testing. Then I started kind of messing around with my food, thinking, well, I'm going to stop eating all meats and fish. I'm kind of going to go vegetarian for a little while because of just how I'm kind of picky about meat I eat anyway. But there's a lot of added hormones and stuff in some of the meat, and whether it's cattle or whatever. And I got really thin. And I think that, for me, 125 pounds is thin. I'm like, I feel my best around 135. But I got attached to it. So I allowed those old patterns, even though I had done all of this healing work, even though I knew the trauma responses, and I knew there was a part of me that got attached to, I think, the ego part of it, to be honest.
Sure.
Of, wow, I feel good. And I can buy all these clothes because everything looks so good right now and feels so good. And it's like, now that I'm back at 135, I'm like, I'm purging this shit because it's too tight.
Right.
I had no legs. I had no legs. I had no muscle, and it's like, but the acceptance in that and understanding like the ebbs and flows and finding the beauty within through all this. You're a female, your body changes from 4 hours to 6 hours, much less from day to day. And a big part of this for me is thinking I have a 13-year-old daughter, and I always think to myself, and kind of the way that I coach myself out of this is, how would you coach Tatum through this right now? And realizing I wasn't always so nice to myself in my head. Yeah. And that was the one area that I still battle with the most.
Yep.
Is being nice to myself on a daily basis. And even though I know the patterns, I know what they are, but I have a new thing that I do every day in the morning or sometime throughout the day. I have to look myself in the mirror and say, I love you. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for all the hard work that you do. I value you, and respect yourself on your journey. Show yourself some grace and compassion. Some days I forget, and that's okay. But I realize on the days that I forget, those are the days that the old shit can trickle back into my head.
Yeah. It's so important. The words that we speak, the words that we tell ourselves, the narrative that's in our head. I mean, I think we all battle that always. What you just said, I can relate to totally from bodybuilding and the ups and downs of my weight and the ego and the attachment to what it felt like and what it looked like. And I feel like, especially as new moms and as women, we're constantly in social media and celebrities, we're constantly comparing ourselves instead of appreciating everything that we do, everything that we're capable of, and accepting ourselves. And so when I asked you about that psychological journey, specifically with that and what you relearned, that I had a feeling that was what you were going to say. And that was exactly what I hoped you were going to say, because I think we all struggle with that, men too, but specifically as women. And that's what it's all about, is kind of relearning and then discovering, well, why did I feel that way in the first place? Through these new tools, getting on the deeper level and then being able to really address what's going on and staying aware of it, because otherwise there's this lack of awareness. And then you do fall back into those old habits and patterns that you aren't quick to fix. But when you're aware, you can recognize like, oh man, stop it right now. That doesn't happen here anymore. I know what to do with this. I have a toolbox full of tools that I can pull out at any time when I'm feeling this. And that pertains to not just the way we look or the way that we feel or what we eat, but also how we process our emotions, how we communicate with people, the example we want to set for our daughters, how we would speak to them in comparison to how we speak to ourselves. I mean, just across the board. It's hard.
It's so hard.
It's never ending.
And I cry. I still to this day tear up every time. Why is it so hard to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I love you? And I remember to tear up doing it now. Like, why is that so hard? And so what I did is I found a picture of me when I was probably about 2.5, which is about the time that my father passed away. And I know that was a time in little Krystel's life where not only did she lose her daddy, but everyone suffered emotionally during that time. So I lost probably 90% of emotional support and like the true presence of it, you know, and I think looking back, I saved them during that time period of my father dying more than they saved me,
Sure.
you know, or vice versa. It was that interconnected, beautiful relationship. But I have a picture of little Krystel about that time frame on my mirror in my bathroom. And it had this like pretty little smile, and it's so cute because it looks exactly like Brody, my son.
Yeah.
And it reminds me, and I'm probably gonna cry.
It is okay.
But when he was born, I think it was the universe, God, whatever you want to say's way of, okay, Krystel and Matt, you get to start fresh.
Mm-hmm.
You get the opportunity to completely reset and love yourselves and each other and parent in a way that you weren't equipped to when you were in your mid-20s.
Yeah.
You know, and he looks just like me, and it's like, wow, it reminds me every day to enjoy the little moments. So you know what, put your phone away and don't look at, you know, who cares, answer the emails later, take your shoes off, go run in the grass, go feed the fish outside, you know, do the little things, because those are the moments we're not going to get back.
As we learn to lean on people and as we learn to speak about it, and you looking in the mirror and telling yourself that and looking at that picture of Krystel when she's 2.5 allows you to then look at someone else and offer the same empathy and compassion. And it's hard, but it's so worth it. Like all of this that you've been talking about, I feel like I've experienced in my own way with my own details, but the exact same thing on this journey of self-discovery. And half of it is accepting that it's okay to feel differently about what I've been through or how I'm going to handle it going forward. And I think it's beautiful that Matt has been on this journey with you and has been handling his own things in his own way. And you have this reciprocated respect for each other and empathy and compassion in going through this. I feel very fortunate that that's how Greg and I's journey has been. Also, I know not everyone is as fortunate, but I will just ask you, instead of assuming what you would say, would you continue or recommend that someone do this self-discovery journey for themselves, even if their spouse isn't a part of it, even if they're resistant to therapy, even if they're resistant to change, do it anyway? Would you?
We haven't always been in alignment on that.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
Yep.
Someone has to start first.
Yep.
And quite frankly, he didn't have the time to start first.
Sure.
But he saw, wow, you know, Krystel's really feeling better not drinking. She's feeling better, you know, by being able to have a third party to talk to, and she's, you know, less crazy to me. Like, you know, he was feeling the effects
Right.
of my journey, and I think it really intrigued him to do his own work and his own time and his own way.
Yeah.
And we have some of the same resources and we have some different resources, and he's done what's worked for him and I've done what's worked for me. But I think the big thing for our relationship and our marriage and our social life, which I know you and Greg understand as well, is we stopped drinking.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
That
I feel
is,
like I need to have like 10 episodes with 10 different people all about that topic, and not from a space of judgment, but just from a space of experience, because I have chills. I don't know if you can see them, but like the hair on my arms is literally standing straight up because it's something that you just cannot describe and have someone understand even a fraction of what it feels like until they've done it. And I just feel like hearing different people's experience with it could only help someone feel inspired to give it a try. So
I agree. 100% agree. And it wasn't even like, you know, for me, I wasn't a big drinker in college, but when I would drink, I would like drink because I, you know, or I thought I could handle it. I really
well, I
could
feel
not.
like we're pretty similar too, and like this competitive nature of like, I'm going to be the best drinker too. Like, it's not just limited to like being the best.
You're going to have 5 Stellas. I'm going to have 10 Stellas. Like,
yeah, that's right.
And how did my little body even handle that? Well, my body didn't handle that. So we didn't just cold turkey stop drinking. I'll kind of explain this a little bit just so I'm clear on this. You know, during the week, even in our heyday, we wouldn't really drink, but we'd go start a brunch on Saturday morning after class, after class on Sunday morning when we met the first. No, I'll never forget that conversation with you when you're like, oh, we just don't drink. And I'm like chugging my mimosa. Why not? Oh my God.
That's usually, and probably in your experience now, that's usually everyone's first response. Like, well, why don't you? Or
well,
like,
and have fun with you without drinking. Like, I'm fun anyway. It's just, I didn't realize that to the extent until I took it out.
yeah. Yeah, people don't, I just feel like, and this is just me blanket statementing here, so I don't mean to speak out of turn, but like as a society, I think we don't feel like we know it's an option to not drink, but like, is it really an option to not drink? Everybody drinks for everything. We drink to celebrate. We drink when we're pissed off. We drink when we're upset. We drink at kids' parties. We drink everywhere. So
everywhere.
What do you mean you don't drink? That's an option?
Right. Right. And that
you
was
must be pregnant. Like,
right. Well, that's the other thing. Are you still pregnant? No, actually I'm not. We would cut back and once we started more of our deep healing journey and I understand about the PTSD, I understood what alcohol did to the limbic system. Again, I dive all deep, get into the scientific factors, realizing alcohol is the number one precursor to really firing up that fight or flight. Mm-hmm. How many sober bar fights have you ever seen? None. Like,
well, just the hormonal school fights. My goodness, like that's exactly like everybody's out of control in their hormonal rage in teenager years. That's what it's like when your limbic system's all out of whack because you have alcohol that's impacting your decision-making process.
And not only does it affect your limbic system, but it affects your prefrontal cortex, which is your decision-making, which doesn't even develop until you're 25. And what the hell do we do before we're 25? We get shit-faced in college all the time.
I just feel like at the start of this self-discovery journey, you start learning things, you start seeing the benefits of understanding things on a deeper level, not because someone's telling you you have to, or you've got to learn this, or you've got to do this for your job, or this is a boundary you need to abide by because I'm telling you to, but because you're like, I want to live my best, most healthy version of myself. And I see how that's progressing as I learn more about things that maybe I didn't understand before. And
that's it. And it's not that, the last time I had a drink, I never thought, oh my God, I'm never going to drink again. Because I would have one here and there. But then I also realized how when I did have one, especially when I took really long breaks, like months and months without having one, like I don't feel good. Mm-hmm. Like I don't feel right. And then understanding what's going on with my brain chemistry and that there's some chronic brain inflammation from the trauma stuff. It's like, well, I want that to heal. I want that to die down because when we go around with chronic brain inflammation, we're way more susceptible to things like Alzheimer's and MS and Parkinson's. And I wish, and like my dream is to create some sort of foundation to provide resources for people to be able to get this kind of testing. Funny, you mentioned Resilient Retreat, which is a nonprofit that I'm on the board of, that we provide free programming to people of helping professions. So people who go through chronic stress in their job, to people survivors of trauma, abuse, first responders, nurses, doctors, teachers. I feel like almost everyone's a helping profession in this day and age.
Sure.
But, and I did a trauma and resiliency course when I started getting involved with them. And I feel like, wow, this is the stuff we need to be teaching people in school. Mm-hmm. Like these are like, I could care less if my daughter knows about ancient battles. Like if she wants to learn that on her own time, like for her to understand what trauma and resiliency, what it really takes to be resilient.
Yeah. Emotional regulation, how to respond to people versus react, like all of these things that you need to function as a healthy human being. I don't need to know who won the War of 1812. Oh. And I still don't. And I was probably taught that 10 times in school, and who the hell cares? Like,
right.
If I get it, but we aren't taught the things that help us develop meaningful relationships and with ourselves first. Right. And I'm with you.
And that for me is, it's completely changed the way that we parent. It's completely changed our relationship, our marriage, and understanding. I can walk up to Matt now and be like, I'm having a moment. I need some time.
Yep.
And he doesn't feel like it's him because he's done work, and that's a big thing. Like I remember for me, like, oh my God, he's a bad mood. Is it something I said? Is it something I did? No, he's just having a moment. Why are you personalizing everything? And it's so interesting to me. And I'm jumping around a little bit here, but like, why do we take it so personally if our spouse is having a moment versus a friend? Like, you could call me and be like, Krystel, I need to vent, and like go off about something. And like, I'm in a shit mood, and I would totally support you and be fine.
Yeah.
Why is it that like, if our spouse were to like come home and be like, I'm in a shit mood, and be like, oh my God, this is something I did.
What did I do? And how can I
What
fix
did I
it? Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah,
that
totally.
but again, this totally goes along with like having the tools. Like, now I totally understand, but I want our kids to understand. I mean, they're going through adolescence. It's like, their friends, their moods are going to change. They're going to be up and down and all around. Like, just learn how to not personalize and stay in your own bubble, your own energy bubble, and your own space. And
You
yeah.
are the definition of what this podcast is about and why I wanted to have one in the first place. And I know you want to start yours or are already looking into starting your own, but I just think it's so important to have these conversations and to talk about connection and why it's important, and permission and empathy and sympathy and grief for the things that we're letting go of, and acceptance, all of these things that aren't talked about. I have those goosebumps again where the hair is standing straight up on my arms because it's so meaningful. It's so intentional. I feel so much more connected to you in our few recent conversations that are so deep than I ever did when we were around each other multiple times a week in a quick surface setting. And I just feel like people are too busy. They're too afraid. They're too shy. They're too, caught up in the distractions of everyday life to really go there. And so I am so appreciative of you being so vulnerable and open to sharing where you've started and where your journey has progressed to and what you've learned along the way, because I think it empowers and inspires people to do the same. And if someone can take one thing away from what we've just talked about, just as two girlfriends here sharing our own personal stories, it makes it all worth it. And I want to dig deeper into some of these things that we've scratched the surface on and really hone in on some of the specifics of them at another time, because I think there's so much value and richness in those conversations for specifically women and moms who are juggling it all the time and trying to keep it together, but then giving themselves the time to fill their own cup up. So thank you 100 times over for being here and for sharing. Where in the meantime can we find more information about you, Resilient Retreat, your podcast that you're going to be starting? You have so much value to add to people's lives. So help us figure out where to get more Krystel.
Well, so much, Cameo, for having me today. And it was a pleasure to be here. And I will say, and just cap on this before I go into details about where to find me. The one thing that I realized, and that's pivotal for me, is that I realized, good, bad, indifferent, life is happening for me, not to me.
Mm-hmm.
So allowing, things that I would once look at as, oh my gosh, why did this, like, okay, where's my opportunity for growth in this situation?
Mm-hmm.
So right now I'm dabbling a bit, I've always posted and stuff like that on social media. I am starting my own podcast. I actually have my first filming for my podcast next week. It's going to be called Krystel Clear, Authentically. But I want to get about 5-6 episodes going before I release it. So no set release date yet. Resilient Retreat is an amazing nonprofit in Sarasota. They do virtual programming though. I mean, I personally am doing the programming for myself. I've done some creative memoir class. I've done yoga and energy healing. I'm doing neurofeedback, which is amazing. They just provide incredible resources. You don't have to be local. If you could be from anywhere, we have people all around the world. It's just, you go through a screening process and they log you in, and that was pretty humbling to do. Again, going back to, not realizing the complexity of your life situations, but wow, that counts as trauma. So just encouraging people, helping professions, again, teachers, just thinking of what the world has been through in the past 3-5 years. I think everyone could utilize something like that. And No Blues News was the other. My girlfriend, Hallie Pilot Young, she's starting a really awesome nonprofit. It's going to be all positive media, which has been like my dream. So it's really interesting that my two dreams come true. Like, I was going through my journey, I'm like, oh, I wish I could just create a place where like we had all the resources and tools to help with all the things. And wow, resilient retreat opportunity landed in my lap just from doing a tour and being a crazy passionate person and being like, oh my God, let's do this. And there's a lunch, and then it ended up being like, wow, would you like to be on our board?
Yeah.
And I think for me, that was a huge pivotal part of my life, because it's like my life experiences and the trauma have worth and value. Like someone has found value in my shit, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
And it's led me on this beautiful journey of helping other people and being involved and continuing to evolve myself and being able to spread, my knowledge and resources about all of this I have so many things. Like I said, we could go on and on and on about hundreds of different topics.
Right.
But for me, just the ability to get it all out there to other people. So there's going to be more coming. Maybe on another one of our episodes, I'll have more, but I'm on social media. I'm private, but
well, I will link you in the show notes just so people can find you. And obviously private accounts are important. They're a preference, but I think there are a lot of women who may find you and would like to follow you for your inspiration
Absolutely.
and your growth journey.
Yeah. Saw you on the Cameo Show, and that way I know you're a like-minded person, and
not a bot, not a weirdo.
No, not a weirdo. I like to keep my private life private and my family sacred, so I try not to put too much out there. But podcast is coming soon, and I'm so excited.
Yeah, and also I'll link a link to the Resilient Retreat website in the show notes.
And Amen clinics as well, if you want, for the brain scans.
Absolutely. That would be wonderful. I think just loading people up with resources is so important. I think that not everyone is comfortable or brave enough sharing all of their shit. We happen to be two of them that are, and I find there's a lot of beauty and value in that. So, but if it can help one person, like I said, and I know that you feel the same way, it's all worth it, because
100%,
we all go through it.
And it's just to know that you're not alone. Like I said, that community and that connection for me was what saved my life. It saved my sanity. It saved my marriage. It saved my children, and I just want to provide that for other people, whether it's a one-on-one or just utilizing some of the resources I have or finding your own and just, own it. That's
feeling empowered to do so.
Yeah. Accept it, own it, and take charge of it. So.
Well, thank you, ma'am. It's been a pleasure. It always is. You are a ray of sunshine, a big, beautiful smile, and you have so much to offer. So I'm grateful that you were here to share it with us. So
thank you so much, Cameo. I look forward to seeing you again soon.